Margaret never imagined her name would fade from her family's lips. For years, she had been the quiet backbone, the woman who remembered every birthday, soothed every fear, and filled every silence with care. Her husband had passed a decade ago, her children scattered like autumn leaves. The house that once echoed with laughter now hummed with the sound of a single clock, ticking, judging, reminding her she was still here. Every morning she brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for the ghost of her past. She'd sit by the window, watching the mailman pass by, hoping for something more than bills and advertisements. But that morning, the envelope was different. Cream-colored, thick paper, handwritten, her name, Mrs. Margaret Hensley. Her heart skipped. No one called her that anymore. She tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single sentence. Asterisk. We need to talk about what you left behind. Asterisk, her pulse quickened. What could that mean? She hadn't spoken to anyone from her old town in years. Maybe it was a mistake. That the handwriting, she knew it. It was her daughter's. Except, her daughter hadn't written her since the funeral. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house, the groan of pipes, the shuffle of wind, felt like something coming closer. Her mind replayed the years of silence, of unanswered calls. What had she left behind? Memories? Regrets? Or something worse? As dawn broke, she decided she would go back. Back to the town that forgot her. Back to the life that once defined her. She packed a single suitcase, placed the letter inside her coat pocket, and whispered, "Maybe it's time to be remembered again." But when she stepped outside, she noticed something strange. Another envelope, tucked beneath her doorstep. The same handwriting. This one read, asterisk. Don't come back. Asterisk, her fingers went cold. Somewhere, someone didn't want the past uncovered. And for the first time in years, Margaret wasn't afraid. She was alive again. The train rattled along the tracks, carrying Margaret toward the place she once called home. Fields blurred past her window, golden and familiar, yet distant, like memories that refused to stay still. She hadn't been back in over 20 years. Every tree, every sign, every stretch of road had once been part of her story, until she was written out of it. She clutched the letters in her coat pocket, her thumb tracing the ink of her daughter's handwriting. 2 notes, one asking her to return, one warning her not to. It felt like being pulled in 2 directions by ghosts. When the train stopped at Willow Creek Station, the chill of the past met her at the door. The air smelled of pine and rain. She stepped down, scanning the small crowd. No one familiar. No one waiting. The cab driver barely looked at her as he loaded her bag. "Haven't seen you before," he said. "Just visiting?" Margaret nodded. Something like that. The drive through town was a blur of half-forgotten landmarks. The bakery where she once worked weekends. The park where her children played. The church where she'd stood in black 20 years ago. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt smaller. When they reached her old house, the cab stopped without a word. The garden was overgrown. Windows boarded. Paint peeling. She hadn't sold it. She couldn't bring herself to. As she stepped out, the driver called after her. "You know that place has been empty a long time, right?" She didn't answer. The front gate creaked open as if it remembered her. Inside, dust coated every surface, but the air felt strangely warm, as if someone had been there. On the kitchen table sat a cup of tea, steam still rising. Her breath caught. "Hello?" No answer. She backed away slowly, heart pounding. Then, from the hallway, she heard the faintest sound, a floorboard creak. And on the wall, written in faded ink, were the words, "You left me here." Margaret froze, her pulse drumming in her ears. The handwriting on the wall looked eerily familiar, shaky but deliberate, as if carved by emotion rather than ink. She reached out, fingertips trembling, tracing the letters. The air seemed heavier now, thick with something she couldn't name. "You left me here." The words echoed in her mind, wrapping around old memories she'd buried decades ago. She followed the creaking sound down the hallway. The floorboards groaned under her weight, leading her toward the living room, the heart of the house, once filled with laughter. The old grandfather clock still stood in the corner, its pendulum swaying gently. But it hadn't worked since the day her husband died. Her chest tightened. She remembered that night. The storm, the argument, the silence that followed. And then, the decision that had split her family apart. A photograph sat crooked on the mantelpiece. It was of her children, Daniel and Lily, when they were small. She lifted it, brushing away the dust. Their smiles were so innocent, untouched by the years that would later harden them. Behind the frame, something rustled, a folded piece of paper tucked into the wood. Her hands shook as she opened it. A child's drawing. Crayons faded with time. It showed the house, a woman standing by the door, and a small figure in the window, crying. On the back, scrawled in a child's handwriting, were the words, asterisk, "Don't forget me." Asterisk. Margaret sank into a chair, her knees weak. She had left the house after her husband's death, unable to face what it reminded her of. She thought her children understood, that leaving was survival. But as tears welled in her eyes, she realized how much was never said. The silence had grown roots, deep and twisted. Suddenly, footsteps sounded again, heavier this time, deliberate. "Lily," she whispered. The steps stopped. A door creaked open upstairs. Then, a faint voice drifted down. "You shouldn't have come back, Mom." Margaret's breath hitched. That voice, older, broken, yet unmistakable. Lily. But it couldn't be. Her daughter lived hundreds of miles away. Or at least, she used to. Margaret slowly climbed the stairs, her hand brushing the rail she'd once polished every Sunday. Each step groaned beneath her, echoing in the hollow house. "Lily?" she called again, her voice barely above a whisper. No answer. Only the sound of wind slipping through cracked windows. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out before her like a memory. The peeling wallpaper, the faint scent of lavender, the family photos still hanging askew. Her eyes landed on one door at the end. Lily's old room. The doorknob glimmered in the dim light, and she could see a faint glow spilling from underneath. Her heart raced. She turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open. The room was almost untouched. The floral curtains still hung by the window. The old desk was covered in books and half-faded notes. On the bed sat a music box turning on its own, playing a soft lullaby that made her chest ache. She hadn't heard that tune since Lily was 10. Margaret stepped closer, but then she saw it. The shape of someone sitting in the corner, half hidden by shadow. "Lily?" she whispered again. The figure didn't move. But when Margaret reached for the light switch, the bulb flickered to life, and the corner was empty. Only a mirror stood there, old and cracked. In its reflection she could see herself. But behind her, a second figure. A girl with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes filled with hurt. Margaret spun around. No one. The music box stopped. Then the air shifted, colder, heavier. On the mirror, words began to appear, fogging from the inside. Asterisk, "You promised you'd come back for me." Asterisk. Margaret stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. The same words she'd told her daughter the night she left. And now they were back to haunt her. Margaret's hands trembled as she backed out of the room, her pulse loud in her ears. The air felt electric, as if the house itself was alive and listening. She stumbled into the hallway, clutching the wall for balance. "It's not real," she whispered to herself. I'm just tired. That's all. But when she reached the stairs, she froze. There was a shadow at the bottom, faint but moving. She blinked, and it was gone. Heart pounding, she descended carefully. The moment her feet touched the last step, the old clock in the living room began to chime. It hadn't worked in decades, but now it rang, deep and hollow, counting out 12 heavy notes. Midnight. The sound filled the entire house, vibrating through her bones. When the final chime faded, she noticed something new, a photograph lying face down on the floor. She picked it up. It was her family. Her husband, her children, and herself, standing in the front yard. But her own face was scratched out. Beneath it, a single word written in red ink. * liar. * Margaret's breath caught. Her hands shook as she turned toward the doorway. Who's there? She demanded, her voice cracking. Silence. Then, the faintest whisper. You left him too. Her stomach twisted. She told herself for years that leaving after her husband's death had been the only way to survive. But now the house seemed to accuse her. Every creak, every flicker of light, every echo of her name. The guilt she'd buried began to surface like water breaking through a dam. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't have a choice, she said softly. You don't understand. The air shifted again, the candles flickering violently. And then she saw it. In the reflection of the window, a man's silhouette standing behind her, just for a moment. Her husband's eyes, hollow and knowing, staring right through her. Margaret stumbled backward, her hand pressed against her chest. The image in the window was gone as quickly as it appeared, but the chill it left behind lingered. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You're not real. You're gone. She turned away, her eyes darting around the room. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. The air smelled of damp wood and old memories. She reached for the lamp, turning it on. The warm light flickered over the walls, illuminating the dust and age. That's when she noticed the letter on the floor. Not yellowed by time, but freshly folded, like it had just been placed there. Her name was written across it in her husband's handwriting. She felt the world tilt as she picked it up. Inside, the paper trembled in her hands. Asterisk. You took their future when you left. I stayed for them, even when you couldn't. But the truth has its way of finding home. Asterisk. Her breath caught. You stayed? That's not true. You're... She stopped herself. Dead. He had died that night, or at least, that's what she believed. But what if she had never really known what happened? What if her children had? Her thoughts were broken by the sudden ringing of the telephone, the one on the kitchen wall that hadn't been connected for decades. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Against every instinct, she lifted the receiver. Hello? She whispered. Static filled the line. Then a faint voice. Trembling. Distant. Mom? Margaret froze. Her throat tightened. Lily, the line cracked. He never left, Mom. You just didn't look close enough. The call went dead. Margaret stood in the silence, the receiver still pressed to her ear. Outside, thunder rolled and the house seemed to breathe. She looked toward the hallway again. The front door was wide open, and muddy footprints led straight in. The storm outside raged, louder as Margaret followed the muddy footprints across the living room floor. Each print was fresh, glistening under the flickering light, leading toward the basement door, a door she hadn't opened since the night everything fell apart. Her breath came shallow, her pulse racing. This isn't real, she whispered. It can't be. But she couldn't stop herself. She grabbed a flashlight from the counter, its weak beam cutting through the dark. The basement door creaked open with a long, aching sound. The smell hit her first. Damp concrete, old wood, and something faintly metallic. The staircase groaned under her weight as she descended, the air growing colder with every step. At the bottom, the light caught something that made her freeze. A chair. Old, wooden, and facing the wall. Her heart hammered. "Who's down here?" she called, her voice trembling. Silence. Then a soft, rhythmic tapping like fingernails against wood. She raised the flashlight, sweeping it slowly across the room. There in the corner, a figure. Not moving, not speaking, just sitting in the shadows. Her throat tightened. "Daniel?" she whispered, thinking of her son, the one who hadn't spoken to her since he turned 18. The flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, she saw his face. Pale, still, eyes open but empty. Then darkness. The light went out completely. She fumbled with the switch, panic rising in her chest. No, no, no. When it finally flicked back on, the chair was empty. But on the wall behind it, written in smeared mud, were the words, asterisk, tell them what you did. Asterisk. Margaret's knees gave out. She fell to the cold floor, the truth pressing against her chest like a weight. The night her husband died wasn't what she remembered. She hadn't just left. She had run. Margaret knelt on the cold basement floor, her breath shallow, her thoughts spinning. The truth pressed against her mind like a knife she'd tried to forget existed. She remembered the rain that night, the shouting, the crash, her husband's anger, her own fear. But the end? It had always been a blur. Until now. Tell them what you did. The words echoed, burning through her chest. She pushed herself up, her flashlight trembling in her hand, and saw something glinting beneath the old rug in the corner. Kneeling again, she peeled it back. There, beneath layers of dust and time, was a small metal box, rusted but still locked tight. Her hands shook as she pried it open. Inside were photographs, letters, a ring, and a single police report. Her husband's name. The words asterisk, case closed, accidental fall. Asterisk. Margaret's stomach twisted. That wasn't true. She remembered the fight. How he'd grabbed her arm, how she'd pushed him back, and how he'd stumbled, hit his head, and never moved again. Her children had been upstairs. She'd told them he slipped, told herself the same lie until she almost believed it. Tears blurred her vision. I was scared, she whispered to no one. I didn't mean to. But then, from upstairs, came the unmistakable sound of laughter. Children's laughter, the kind she hadn't heard in years. It floated down the staircase, sweet and haunting. Daniel? Lily? She called, voice cracking. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the walls. Then it stopped, replaced by a soft humming. The lullaby from the music box. Her blood ran cold. Slowly she turned toward the stairs. Two small shadows stood at the top, holding hands, just watching her. Mom, a small voice said. We waited. Margaret stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, the beam of her flashlight trembling as it caught the two faint silhouettes above. The outlines of Daniel and Lily, small, motionless, impossibly young. This isn't real, she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. You're not here. But their eyes soft, full of something between sorrow and accusation, never left her. The air felt heavy, like time itself had stopped breathing. Slowly she climbed the stairs. Every step made the shadows seem closer, clearer. When she reached the top, they were gone. Only the old hallway remained, dim and silent. The storm's rumble faint outside. But then music again. The lullaby. It came from the living room this time. She followed the sound, heart pounding in her chest. The music box sat on the table, turning by itself, the tune warped and slowing. Beside it was something new. An open photo album she didn't remember owning. The first page showed her children's birthdays, holidays, smiles that seemed endless. But as she turned the pages, the photos began to change. The smiles faded. The light dimmed. Her face disappeared from each one, erased bit by bit, until there was nothing left of her at all. She stared, her hand trembling. Then, on the final page, a photograph she had never seen her house, abandoned and dark. A single figure stood in the window. Her. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, were the words. Asterisk. Now do you see what forgetting feels like? Asterisk. Margaret's knees buckled, the weight of her choices crashing down like a wave. She had left to escape her pain, but all she had done was pass it on. I'm sorry, she whispered to the empty room. But then, a voice, soft and close to her ear, replied, Then show us. Margaret wiped her tears with shaking hands. The whisper still echoed in her ear, soft, almost loving, yet filled with something that made her heart ache. Then show us. She looked around the living room, her gaze falling on the broken picture frames, the half-burned candles, the walls that had absorbed every unspoken word. Slowly, she walked to the center of the room and sat down. I ran because I thought I couldn't fix it, she said aloud, her voice trembling. I thought leaving would protect you. But I see it now. All I did was make the silence louder. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The air grew warmer, softer, as if the house itself was listening. Lily, Daniel, she whispered. I remember everything now, and I'm sorry. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice steadied. If I could go back, I would have stayed. I would have held you both. I would have faced the pain, instead of hiding from it. A single candle flickered back to life, then another. The house filled with light, gentle and golden, casting away the shadows. She looked up, and there they were. Her children, no longer angry, just sad, but at peace. They stood together in the doorway, their outlines faint but real enough to make her heart break. You can rest now, Mom, Lily said softly. We already forgave you. Margaret reached out, her hand trembling. I love you, she whispered. The two figures smiled, fading slowly into the glow. The music box began to play again, this time the melody clear and steady. Margaret closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. When the morning came, the house was still. The front door stood open, sunlight spilling across the floor. And on the kitchen table lay the final letter, written in her familiar hand. For years I ran from the ghosts I made, but in the end, they were only waiting to lead me home. And that was Margaret's story. A story about regret, forgiveness, and the quiet kind of love that survives even death. Sometimes, the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. And sometimes, that's exactly where healing begins. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit you the most, or if you've ever faced something you wish you could undo. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, emotional, real, and deeply human, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and remember, every ending is just another chance to begin again.